Okay, welcome everyone. We'll give everyone a few minutes to jump in here before we get started. But feel free to drop us a line in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Hear how you're doing. Let's see. Let me pull up my notes so I'm not totally lost as we have get started in the fun today. Yeah, we've got quite a few people signed up for today's session. I'm really excited. Had a good response. So welcome everyone. Simon, welcome. Happy to have you here.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay, we will give everyone probably just like 2, maybe 3 minutes before we get started, and feel free to drop a line in the chat. We'd love to hear from you here how you're doing. Hopefully, everybody's ready for the weekend. I know I am. We've had a lot of fun this week doing with outlining earlier on Monday, and then our series Bible creation on Wednesday, and now today we get to talk about serialized fiction in Scrivener. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. Oh, wow. Excellent.
People
We get a
from
lot of people.
everywhere.
Yeah, people from all over the place. Simon, that's what I love about doing this is I feel like we get to meet writers from like all over the world. Sometimes I'm surprised at some of the people that we see here. It's really incredible
Yeah.
to see such a response.
I see someone from Porto in Portugal. I went there on holiday earlier in the year. It's amazing.
Oh, that's wonderful. That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm based in Texas, and so I'm looking here and see if I see any fellow Texans here. But yes, right there, Catherine from Austin. Great welcome. I'm seeing Germany, Scotland, Florida, California, another Germany, South Africa. Woohoo, welcome Amanda from South Africa, Sonia from the Netherlands. So we've got a lot of great people here from all over. A bunch of people from the UK too. Shelly, it's good to see you back. Haven't seen you in a while. That's great. She's in Australia. Woohoo, that's fun. That's early morning there, isn't it? Yeah, that's pretty early. So thank you for joining us so early in Australia. Eric says, longtime Scrivener user, and he says, hi, Simon. Eric from Gleaning Words on Substack. Oh,
Yeah.
glad to see
Hi,
another.
Eric.
Go ahead.
Some
It's
familiar faces popping up.
Yeah, it's good to see a fellow Substacker on here. That's great. Let's see who we got. Oh man, this is wonderful. I can't even keep up with the chat. Here we go. Finally got to the bottom. Well, excellent, guys. Well, before we get started, I'd love to hear how many of you are on Substack. How many of you are writing on Substack or writing serialized fiction? That's me right there. That's Simon too. To him, Shelly. Good to be back. Glad to have you. Here, Substack, you're here. Oh, great. Simon and I were just talking about how we are so excited about Substack because it still feels kind of new. There's a lot of people who don't know about it. And so if you're thinking about starting a Substack or you've started a Substack, I think now is like the time to do it. Now is the time to jump on there, get writing. It's a lot of fun. And I don't know, about you, Simon, but like there's just ever since I started Substacking, like actually writing, I actually have been more consistent in my
Mm.
writing and posting each week. I've had a website for years, and I felt like I spent more time working on my website, fixing it, trying to get it to like work than
Yep.
actually ever writing a post. I don't know about you.
Updating your plugins and all of
Yes.
that.
Yep.
Yeah.
All that fun stuff. It's kind of a pain.
Yeah. I've seen
Uh,
that from a lot of people. Like, I think having a newsletter and knowing there's people out there who are reading it, like, it's such a good way to keep
yeah.
yourself productive and kind of getting back to the page.
Yep. Yep. I agree. Kimbo says, "Oh gosh, yeah, WordPress are here too. Substack is so much easier." Oh yeah, yeah, it's so much easier than WordPress. That's so true. There's just too much going on in WordPress, in my opinion. Not to say that you can't do some great things on WordPress. People have and continue to do so, but I love the simplicity of Substack. And the best says, "Would you ever do a tutorial on Substack?" Probably. Yes, we probably will do. I mean, today Simon's going to be talking. Is your presentation have some things to do with Substack too? I assume, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a
Yeah.
mix, and yeah, my newsletter on Substack also has some
Yeah.
tutorials about Substack. So
Perfect.
if you are interested in that, then that's not a bad place to start. Um,
Excellent. While I'm thinking about it, why don't I drop in some of those links too for you guys? So if you want to check out Simon's Substack here, I'll drop that in there. I'll also give these links again at the end. And if you want to check out my links too, what I'm up to as well, there's my links as well. You can just jump on there and check out and see what we're doing and hopefully have a good time. Kevin says he used to have a blog, wrote at least every week, but it's gone quiet for some time now. Okay, Kevin, hopefully this is your catalyst to jump back in there and see what you can do here. Amanda says that's how I found you guys through Simon's Substack. That's great. That's great.
Nice.
Glad to hear
Um,
it.
yeah, I
Here's what.
saw
Yep.
Maurice mentioned that he'd never heard of Substack, and that's something else we were just talking about, Oliver, wasn't it? That
Yep.
if like even though it's been around for 7-ish years,
Yeah.
it seems to be suddenly on a bit of a curve, and like everyone is now starting to hear about it. But obviously some people have been on it for years, but I
Yep.
discovered it a couple of years ago. I think you were saying you've just recently sort of noticed it.
Yep.
And yeah, I think we're going to be hearing more and more about it.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some exponential growth in the next probably few years. I won't be surprised to see Substack just explode. I like how well supported it is. I can always see that they're making updates and changes and improvements and good changes and improvements, not like just like needless, unnecessary changes.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's well supported. It's a great platform. And yeah, I'm excited to hear what we have for you, what we have today. So I'm going to go, I think we're good to go ahead and get started if that's okay with you, Simon. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. I'm just going to introduce Simon real quick, kind of go over our schedule for today, and then I'll turn it over to him, and then we'll just go from that point. So let me just share my screen real quick, and we'll get started here. And Simon, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Everything looking good there? Perfect. So this is Scrivener with Simon K. Jones, how to write serialized fiction in Scrivener. Let's just look at our schedule here real quick, what we're going to be looking at today. Let's see if I, okay. So we'll begin with basically our introduction, which we'll just tell a little bit about who Simon is and what he does. Okay, well he'll give us our training. Then we'll talk about our free resources, and then from there we'll just wrap it up with a quick Q&A. Okay. So Simon is an author and Scrivener user and fellow Substacker, obviously as well. Uh, Very excited to have him here. Simon K. Jones is the author of No Adults Allowed, a modern reimagining of Lord of the Flies, infused with elements of Apocalypse Now. And he's an enthusiastic Scrivener user. Simon devotes his time to crafting serialized fiction, science fiction, and fantasy stories, assisting others in their writing endeavors, and serving as a digital marketing manager at One Further. And of course, if you'd like to read more by Simon, you can subscribe to his Substack, Write More with Simon K. Jones, at simonkjones.substack.com. Okay, well, that does it. I will go ahead and turn the time over to you, Simon. Take it away.
Great. Thanks, Oliver. I'm so
Yeah.
beardy in that photo. I need to do an updated photo. It kind of startled me slightly. Right. Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for coming along. I am just going to share my screen. Uh, right. Has that appeared for everybody?
Looks good on my end.
Fantastic. Okay. So yes, how to write serialized fiction in Scrivener, which I think could also have been titled "Why Using the Right Tool Matters." And I just want to say up front that like this is my experience. Your mileage may vary. Everyone writes in their own way. There's no correct way to write. So as long as you're actually writing, then that is the correct way for you to do it. I don't want to be one of those like writers who's like, you must do it my way. This is just the way I do it, and it might work for some of you, in which case that's cool. If it doesn't, that is also fine. So yes, with that all in mind, like this is how I write. So first, I'm going to talk a bit about what I do and sort of how I do it, and then in the second bit, we'll get more into the nuts and bolts of the Scrivener end of it. But yeah, first I want to kind of set the scene because as a serial writer, it's a little bit different to like the usual route. So, you know, a traditionally published person goes through a publisher and their books appear on digital shelves and in bookshops. Indie publishers tend to go the same sort of way where they'll focus on ebooks, getting it on Amazon, that kind of thing, and getting it into stores as well. What I do is slightly different because I'm publishing serials online. So these are the stories that I've been working on for a while. I write science fiction and fantasy, and like I say, the thing that's a bit different is that I publish them as weekly serials, and you can see the dates on here. This is when each of these stories ran for their run. And the way to think about it is it's structurally, or the way it's delivered and experienced by the reader is maybe closer to watching a TV show than it is to reading a book in a traditional sense. You can see with the dates on these that it could be anything from a year to 3 years that these things are serialized for. All 4 of these books I used Scrivener to write them, and I'm going to get into why that was essential, essentially. But it's a lovely way to write, because you have readers that start reading with chapter 1, and 3 years later they're still reading it, and they've gone on that kind of exciting journey of discovering the story as it comes together with you. I have readers who were reading back in 2015 with my first book, and they're still reading and commenting on what I'm doing now, which is lovely. It's a very close connection with readers. Like you definitely know that they're there, if you sort of mean. It's not kind of a sales figure in a bookshop. It's like you actively see them and can interact with them if you want to. So just to kind of rewind a bit and explain what a weekly serial is and what I mean by it, because it can exist in various forms. But for me, it means delivering a new chapter every week, approximately 1,200 words. So I've settled on that number after many years of doing this, because it's long enough to have some substance in the chapter. So 1,200 words is enough that you can actually get into some character, you can deal with some interesting substantive material. It's not just like a throwaway thing, but it's also short enough that you can read it in a single setting. So you can read it like just over breakfast or on the bus or the tube to work, and critically it doesn't start to compete with all the other things that people want to do. So it's not competing with just household stuff, the day job, and it's not competing for time with Netflix and computer games and traditionally published books and all that kind of thing. Because I think as an indie author doing a slightly kind of experimental, weird way of putting stories out, like if my chapters were too long and it was seen as difficult to find the time to read them, that would be a problem. So yeah, that's the kind of sweet spot I found. I deliver chapters directly to subscribers. So although I use Substack, and I'll explain kind of where that fits, I don't really have a sort of middleman as such. So I've moved away from the social media era where you'd have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, what have you, as a kind of intermediary between you and the readers, and I go kind of direct to them. In terms of serials, like they're not a new thing, so it's having a bit of a resurgence, but it's absolutely not new. So it was really common in like the Victorian period. A lot of famous books that we now consider as being novels started life as serials. They went out in magazines and newspapers, and that's how they came to be. And then once they were serialized, they then became a novel. And this was not unusual. This was the way that many very, very well-known writers now kind of publish their work. Charles Dickens is like the obvious one that always comes up whenever you read about serialization anywhere. Immediately it's like, Charles Dickens did this, which he did. But then over time it sort of drifted away from literature, and the idea of the serial as a storytelling form ended up going to radio, and then it went to TV, and it went to comics. They all were explored the space, and you could say that it's gone to movies now in a way, because so much of cinema is very long running franchise type stuff that they're actually trying to do serial storytelling as well, just in the most expensive form you can ever do it. And literature sort of forgot, like literature became about the novel. Like you had the short story still as a singular thing, but basically literature was the novel for most of the 20th century and now, and serials didn't really have a place to fit in, which was a shame. But yeah, they're back, and it's all thanks to the internet. Basically, it's sort of the perfect delivery mechanism for serials in various ways. So in terms of that delivery, I started out using something called Wattpad. This is still around. It's got a massive readership. I kind of think of it as YouTube, but for words. And I mean that in like all the good and the bad connotations that might have. But yeah, you can publish on there for free, and you may or may not get readers. It's all algorithmic, and there's a huge international global audience on there. So that's how I kind of got started, because 10-ish years ago that seemed like the best option. I now do it through Substack, as me and Oliver were excitedly talking about earlier. And I've made this shift because I think we've all felt that social media, that seemed to have so much promise, and Wattpad sort of sits more at that end in some ways. Over time, as creators, we've realized that we're sort of borrowing audiences from these places. So, my first book, I was really lucky. It's had like hundreds of thousands of reads on Wattpad, but I can't do anything with those people. Like, I don't know who those readers are. I can't contact them directly in a useful way. So it's slightly limiting. And it's the same if you're on Instagram and you've got 200,000 followers. Like, you can't do anything with them. If you decide to go somewhere else, you have to leave them behind. And even of those 200,000 people, like, how many of them are actually going to see your posts? So this has kind of become an increasing problem over time. And certainly for writers, I think Substack has kind of solved it. So the main thing is that you own your stuff. So the subscribers on my Substack, and I should say, like, I say my Substack, but it's a newsletter like that. Fundamentally, that's kind of what it is at its core. And I own that list. So if I decide for whatever reason to leave Substack in the future, whether that's because something better comes along or because it gets bought by like a really rich, crazy person who does weird things to it, whatever the reason, I can just take my list and all my content, go somewhere else, and essentially carry on. And my readers won't really notice or care. They just will continue receiving my stuff into their inboxes. And that's the benefit of owning your list and also having a kind of direct channel to the reader. You're not reliant on Meta's algorithms or Google's algorithms or anything like that. Having said that, I mean, I'm sure Google would love to upend email and get a bit more control over that. And I think AI could be a weird, unpredictable factor. So Substack also have a nice mobile app. So that kind of gets around some of the spam issues that email potentially could have. So if people don't want to get newsletters into their email, they can get it into the Substack app, which does work quite nicely. Critically, it's free to use. So as a serial writer, if I was using something like MailChimp, it actually doesn't scale very well because the more subscribers I have, the more expensive it is to send the emails. You pay per subscriber essentially, which is fine if you're using MailChimp as a company and you're using MailChimp to sell your products. You can work out the economics of that. If you're a writer and the newsletters you're sending are the product, then it just doesn't make sense. So Substack is free to use. And it has this optional paid subscription model. So you can choose to paywall some or all of your content. You don't have to, you can put it all out for free as well. You can have a sort of patronage model where everything's free, but people can still pay if they want to. And it's fascinating because that's also how Substack make their money. So they take 10% of paid subscriptions from the writers. And what this means is they have a very strong incentive to make sure that writers can make money on the platform, which kind of turns everything upside down. It means that Substack's design motivations, like every decision they make, has to be positive for writers, because if they mess that up, they don't get paid either. This is completely different to like pretty much every other platform where the people paying the bills are actually the advertisers. That's where they're making their money, whether it's Meta or Google or YouTube or whoever. So they have to please the advertisers. And as has been said many times, the users are actually the product that are being sold to the advertisers. So this is flipping that entire model upside down in a great way, basically. And it's not that noticeable at first, but over time you slowly realize how it's kind of filtering through into the culture of the entire place. It has really good networking features built in as well, which can be great for growing your list and finding readers and finding other writers in particular to communicate with. I mean, that's how me and Oliver started chatting in the first place. And basically email newsletters are just brilliant, because as social media platforms and other fancy things have come and gone, like email newsletters as a concept has been around since the mid 90s, maybe, and it still just kind of works. Like, it's not fancy, but it works. It's reliable. You go straight to the person. The person chooses to receive your emails, and there's a pretty good chance they will actually receive them. There's no algorithmic shenanigans getting in the way. And you can go pre-internet, and the idea of a newsletter through the front door, through the letterbox, was a thing. Like, this is an old concept, and it has always worked, and people respond to it really well. This is just the latest version. Substack is just one option. There's loads of different places that do this kind of thing now. Button Down, Ghost, Beehive, they're kind of the most similar equivalents to Substack, I suppose. And then you've got the slightly more corporate like ConvertKit and MailChimp. Obviously, you've got the old school WordPress, and then you've got Medium, which was sort of the cool hot thing before Substack came along, and now it sits in a slightly strange place, but still has some cool features. But there's lots of options, and that's another thing that's good. Like all of these, I think, yeah, all of these now you can export and take your readers with you and go somewhere else. So the newsletter space has high competition, which means they're all incentivized to just get better and do good stuff by their users. Unlike, say, Instagram, which, you know, the competition doesn't really work in the same way there. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the way I publish. So not just like the fundamental delivery mechanism, but the way I actually do it, because it's not for everybody. And sometimes when I explain what I do, it makes other writers' heads explode, or they get this look on their face like they think I'm entirely mad. So there's two ways of doing serialization. The first option is to write the whole thing first. So you write your entire manuscript, you edit it, refine it, rewrite it, do whatever you want to get it to like the exact perfect state that you want. And then you publish it as a serial. So you've finished the whole thing, and then you put it out chapter by chapter on a weekly basis or whatever cadence you want. It's very similar to writing a novel. I mean, it is basically the same as writing a novel. You're just then putting it out into the world in a different way. That's not what I do. So I do the other way you can do it, which is publishing as you go. So I write and publish at the same time. Each week I write a chapter and then I publish it. And that's the bit that makes people go, what? That's insane. Why would you do that? It's a good question. So it means that I'm publishing the story before the manuscript is done. Like the whole thing is not finished yet, which I'm sure all the writers among you who write fiction can immediately see the risk of doing that. But you can create a buffer. So I don't really have a buffer because this is just the way I do it now, but you can have like a 6-week buffer, a 6-month buffer, whatever you want. So you can give yourself a bit of breathing space between what you're writing and the chapter that you're publishing in any given week. So if you want to take the stress, the load off a little bit, you can do that. And it is more similar to writing a comic or working on a TV show where the thing is airing or being published while you're still creating it in the background to some degree. I first fell into serial publishing and writing sort of by accident because I was really struggling to finish any projects. I kept flitting. I'd have like 10 projects on the go at once. I'd flip between them. I'd get excited by something new and shiny, and I'd never finish any projects, so nothing ever went out into the world. And then I thought, oh, well, let's try serial publishing on Wattpad. That sounds quite fun. I was going to do it on a like small scale. Turned out it really worked. It like flicked a little switch in my brain, and the idea that I'd already published something, so it existed in the world, and there were readers waiting for the next chapter, kept me coming back to the keyboard and, you know, writing more. It's a great way of committing to something, essentially. And yeah, for me, this is the way my brain works. Like this is how I've written for big projects and published it and found readers along the way. If I try to write these just in my office by myself quietly and then go the traditional route, I don't know if I'd ever have actually finished them. Like again, your brain may work in a more efficient way, but this is something that has helped me massively. So yeah, that's the way I do it. And there are benefits to doing it as you go, because you can experience that journey of discovery with your readers at the same time, which is slightly different to if you've written the whole thing already and you're just putting a chapter out every week. Both very valid ways of doing it, but it's a different experience. So yes, step 1, write the thing in Scrivener. I think I can't really visualize doing this without Scrivener, and I'll get into why in a sec. Or if I did it without Scrivener, I'd be a lot more stressed, that's for sure. And then step 2, publish it on my newsletter, goes out to people. And step 3 is you get readers, and hopefully your graph goes up. That's the idea. So I want to talk about Scrivener in a bit more detail now. And like the main thing with Scrivener is it keeps everything in one place. Instead of having hundreds of notebooks and post-it notes and stuff scattered around the house and losing things, or maybe I'm writing somewhere else and I realize I don't have something that I needed to reference. Everything is in the Scrivener project, and that's always been the case. So it keeps everything under one roof. For a bit of context, this is what I'm writing at the moment. It's called Tales from the Triverse. I've been writing it for 3 years now, so it's a big, a big ambitious serial, and it's science fiction, fantasy, and crime fiction rolled into one. I couldn't decide what genre I wanted to do for my next book, so I just did all three. And what I noticed in particular is that with crime fiction, you have to define the world up front. If you're writing crime fiction set in the contemporary, like modern day, then you don't have to worry so much about it because you inherit the world for free, like the real world. In my case, because I'm dealing with portals and fantasy and magic and crazy futuristic technology, I have to define what that is, and I had to work that out before I started writing and publishing, because the whole point of crime fiction and having detectives who are figuring stuff out is they can only investigate and deduct things if the boundaries are set, if there are limits around the world. And it's the same for the reader. If you're reading crime fiction, part of the pleasure of that kind of thing is trying to be one step ahead of the detective character, or at least in step with them and figuring it out for yourself. And if you get the feeling that the author's just making up the magic or making things up as they go along, you can't do that, because then it's unfair. The rules are changing underneath your feet. So I needed to get that kind of locked in before I even started writing. And as a result, I have this massive, ridiculous research folder within the Scrivener project for Triverse. So this is just kind of like a top level glimpse at it. There's like 20,000 words just of world building and planning and plotting for Triverse, which is ridiculous. I don't say that as a matter of pride or to show off. Like, it is ridiculous, and I don't necessarily recommend doing this, but it felt necessary for this particular project. Like if I dive into the lore folder here, for example, there's a mixture of documents in here. Some of them, like the timeline, is literally just me writing out sequence of events in my made up history, but there's all stuff I had to work out to try and have the world resonate in an interesting way. Each of the worlds, so we've got the fantasy world, the sci-fi world, and the kind of 1970s alternate world, they each have additional documents inside here. This was like the 7 world building components that I figured out. Like, I needed to understand these things in order to know about these societies. As long as I worked out these things, I could then work out pretty much anything else. And this set the rules and the boundaries for then the detective investigations, I suppose. And I've got these for each different element. I also worked out stuff ahead of time, like what's the title going to be? Because with a traditional novel, you can figure that out later on once it's finished. With a serial, you have to have your title before you start publishing, which has a certain like committing to a title before you necessarily know exactly what the shape of this thing is going to be is a challenging thing. And you can see I just went through like loads and loads and loads and loads of different options before I settled on what I actually went for. Additionally, there's documents on tone. So me figuring out like what is the tone of this thing? What is it? What other things, other books and movies and TV shows is it like or not like? What are the core themes that I want to thread through all of the stories? What is the narrative structure? So this is all stuff that comes before the writing because of the way I publish. Like, I have to know this stuff in my head quite to quite fine detail, I suppose. Additionally, I've got folders full of characters. This is just a small section. These are the police officers, basically. And each character has a little blurb, so a little background blurb. They each have a conflict, so something that's in the background that kind of motivates them, which may or may not come out in the story, but it's there. They've got their own little character arc that's going to change. And then the little chart at the top there, a friend of mine showed me this, I think from their like tabletop role playing, but it's a personality matrix where in the rows you have to pick one or the other on each row, and that at a glance defines what that character is. So using this, I then know like how will they talk, what is their dialogue like, how will they behave in any given situation, what their response is going to be. So even if it's like a guest character as such who's just showing up for one chapter, I can do this quickly and I'll be like, yeah, I know this person now. And it enables that consistency as I go along, so that characters aren't going to like shift in strange ways, because it's quite a big cast, and this was useful to keep a handle on that kind of thing. So yeah, once all that was done, I then had to work out what the story was. This was a weird case of like the world had to be defined and then the story came out of it. It's a little bit chicken and egg with that, I always think. And in terms of, I wrote a newsletter like a few months back where I was trying to figure out my plotting method, and it starts off a bit like this. And I don't know if like anyone else feels like this, where you have an idea and it's just like infinite possibilities and you don't know what on earth you're going to do with it. And you need some way of turning this into like a cohesive story with a start and a finish. The way I do it, and I know I'm fully aware this diagram is very silly, but essentially as I serialize something, it's like it's like thinking of a loom going through like a load of string and like turning it into a proper strand of something. So you've got everything that's already been published, and then the bit I'm writing right now, and then the further from that I get, the looser it becomes. There's lots of options. It could go either way, but it's kind of becoming more and more defined over time. But I don't just make it up as I go along, because I think, again, that's not satisfying for a reader, because then you can't factor in things like foreshadowing and proper character arcs. So actually, it's a little bit like this other crazy drawing, where the little squares are kind of like key waypoints along the plot. So I know that I have to get from A to B. How I get there is up for grabs. And this kind of comes down to that like planner versus pantser debate, and everyone sits somewhere on that spectrum. Yes, the timeline loom on Loki. I think I just watched Loki at the time, and I was like, oh, this could work to explain my weird brain. So yeah, good observation there. But yeah, it's about trying to making sense of that madness. But if I completely plan everything and know precisely what the plot's going to be, the writing is not fun. Like there's no discovery left in that process. So I like to leave the story loose so that it can kind of go this way or that. But I always have a destination in mind, so it's always going towards something. It doesn't just feel aimless or like I'm making it up as I go along. I hope that made sense. These diagrams I know are possibly the representation of a slightly crazed mind. And the thing is, figuring this all out while writing and publishing at the same time is quite tricky. And that's where Scrivener comes in again. Like having this all in one place is so critical. And as well as the research, I've also got a big plot folder with lots of documents which are working out different story arcs, subplots, that kind of thing. There's a big long document which is the main story, so this is like a little snippet of it broken down into seasons, so I kind of know what's going to be happening season by season, again as if it was a TV show. And this is not fixed. Like I can tweak this. If I get a better idea, I will quite happily shift into something else. But yeah, keep it all within Scrivener. There's probably better tools or alternate tools that you could use for some of this stuff, but I love having it all in one place. That's quite a big deal for me because I'm constantly referencing and jumping around different things, and having it all within Scrivener just makes that so much easier. Sometimes I use the corkboard like this, where if it's a particularly tricky bit of plot wrangling, I'll just literally slide like cards around. I'll have chapter ideas and headings, and I'll just move them around until I get something that actually makes sense, and then I'll like formalize that and write it up in some other manner. I've also, for this project, I haven't done this for previous ones, but because Triverse is quite episodic, so it is essentially a police procedural, like a cop TV show. I've had a folder of episode ideas for this whole thing, where if I have an idea for an episode or a chapter, I'll just stick it in there. I might not get to it for like 6 months, but I've got this pool of like episodic ideas that I can just pull from, and at any point I'll be like, oh yeah, I'll do this storyline now, and that becomes the next main storyline in the Triverse serial. There's like an overarching main plot as well that threads throughout all of them, but readers can also jump on and off like per story if they want to. And I just stick them all in there so I don't forget anything. So that's the planning stage, and I actually have to write the thing as well, and that's where Scrivener again is really essential, because it is a really efficient way to write. I have to write fast, so I know some people like to write by hand, for example, and then transcribe it or whatever. I have to write onto a computer into a program because otherwise the process is too slow. I wouldn't get a new chapter out every week. So this is generally what my setup looks like when I'm writing Scrivener, which I don't think I'm doing anything particularly crazy here. I wouldn't describe myself as a power user of Scrivener. There's tons of features I don't use. There's stuff that I either don't need or I probably don't even realize it's there. But I love that the program sort of scales and breathes based on what I need it to do. Like you don't have to know how to do everything in order to get a lot out of it. So I might have the chapter that I'm currently writing in one panel. I'll have another chapter, maybe the previous one, as a reference point next to it. Because Triverse in particular I've been writing it for ages. I need to be able to reference what I've written already to avoid plot holes and continuity errors and that kind of thing. Up in the inspector, that's where I'm putting my little notes about what's happening either in the current chapter, or I might have placeholder chapters in the binder that have no actual particular text in it, but the inspector has like a little one-liner or a paragraph of like, here's what's going to happen in this chapter. And then I can park that, get it out of my brain, focus on what I'm doing right now. But I know that when I get to it, I can look in the inspector and be like, oh yeah, that's what this one's all about. I kind of can't say enough about the binder, I think. I mean, it is just it's a fancy table of contents. Like it's a classic tree structure thing. Like it's in loads of programs, but there's something about Scrivener's one that just works really well. And you do get tables of contents in like Google Docs and Word, but there's something about being able to have multiple panels open and reference different things simultaneously and instantly hop around within the structure of a very long form project that is amazing. And it's kind of like the critical part of what I do, I suppose. I think this is what I would struggle to do in a classic word processor where you have like just a long flow of text and that's it. Being able to hop around and kind of see the shape, like you can kind of zoom out and see the shape of a project in Scrivener really easily, or get down line by line and be really, really precise. Quite often, I've been writing this, like I said, for over 3 years now, and I can't remember everything that I've written in the book. It's just like a nature of doing it. But in Scrivener, you can just search for stuff. So, for example, I've got a city called Lairn that's been mentioned a few times, and it's going to become a major location in the upcoming chapters that I'm writing right now. But I need to check what I've said about it in the past. Like, did I say, for example, it was in a tropical climate? Because I don't want to then accidentally contradict that the next time we go there. And in Scrivener, you can just type in a weird word from your weird fantasy story, and it will list all the chapters where you've mentioned that thing. I can hop through them, remind myself what's going on, and so far, like touch wood, it's kept me on track, and I've not got myself in a massive horrible muddle with my own stuff. But yeah, that kind of instant search where it just filters everything down to just the chapters that has that, either that character, the creature, the location, a prop, whatever it may be. It's invaluable. I also just use the target system. So like I said earlier, 1200 words is my target for a chapter. It's a very loose target, so I will happily go over it. You can see this one went over a bit. But having that little green bar that Scrivener does down in the corner and the word count is really good. It shows me how close I am to being ready to publish a chapter that particular week. And I should note that I do edit chapters and proof them and check them, and I record an audio version, which is like another way of checking over it. I don't just like write it and then stick it straight up. So there is a bit of quality control, but the green, that little bar turning green is like the green light for me knowing I've done the work that week. And yeah, it's a small thing, but much appreciated. So yeah, that's a lot of stuff. I hope that all made sense. I don't know whether there's any great revelations in there. Like I say, I don't think I do anything with Scrivener that other people aren't already doing, but the way all of its features, the ones that I use, combine to make this form of writing possible is really exciting to me. And I think this image that is on the Literature and Latte website kind of sums it up. Like, you can see the forest or the trees. You can zoom out and see the narrative structure of your entire project, like a massive, massive long form thing that you're working, or you can hop straight in to work line by line and check that. And that ability to kind of zoom at different scales is, I've not really seen that in any other program. And yeah, it's definitely stopped me falling over myself quite a few times. So like that's the way I do it. And just to kind of sum up like what this actually means practically. So I've been doing weekly chapters. So far it adds up to 278,000 words just for Triverse. So if this was a novel, it would be a big chunky book. Again, I'm not showing off, like it might be way too long. It could be that I should have edited myself more, but yeah, that is how it is. It's 161 chapters. So yeah, at weekly chapters, you can kind of see what that means. 4 seasons, 3 years. This is a big project. It's the 4th one I've done like this. And the point is, I suppose, that I really enjoy doing it. I love it. It's incredibly satisfying. I don't get stressed doing it, and I'm pretty sure that's because I use Scrivener. Like I can't fathom doing this without Scrivener, to be honest. And I know like the tool doesn't matter. Like I said at the very start, if you're writing, then it's all good. Like you're a writer if you're writing. It doesn't matter what you use at all as long as it works for you. So you just, you can, if you've got a pencil and a bit of paper, or to be more accurate, a pencil, a bit of paper, and a cup of coffee, then you're good to go. But actually, for me, it does matter. Like the way I write and publish, the particular like weird way I do it. Although masterpieces have been written on just with a bit of paper and a pen, like I can't imagine writing something that way. It's all about Scrivener for me, and I'm pretty sure that without being able to use Scrivener, the stories that I have written would not exist. I either wouldn't have written them at all, or I'd have given up halfway, or even if I'd somehow managed it, I'd be incredibly stressed, would probably have burned out, maybe after, like halfway through the 2nd book or something, and wouldn't have enjoyed it, and definitely wouldn't be here chatting to you about stuff. So yeah, Scrivener is quite a life-changing product for me, I think, and particularly the way it's now sort of intersected with Substack, which is providing these exciting opportunities for writers on the publishing end. It's a very exciting time, and the way tech is helping writers in this way. And I think tech sometimes these days can feel like a negative thing. There's a kind of a dystopian aspect to tech, which I think we probably all feel in various ways. But like this is a really good example of just a bit of tech that is an amazing tool and does things that are invaluable to creative people. Also, No Adults Allowed, you can get it on Amazon, because that then got turned into a paperback and ebook, which I should get around to doing for the other ones. But yeah, I thought I'd mention that as well. I always feel very strange when I tell people that they can go and like buy a book, but yeah. But it's another example of how like that text, that manuscript wouldn't exist without me writing in this form and not having Scrivener as a tool to do it. And then once it does exist, you can then do all sorts of cool, interesting things with it. I write about this kind of thing all the time on the newsletter. I'm slightly obsessed. So if you're interested in serial fiction and just how you can use it to be more consistently productive, then do check out the newsletter. I think if you point your phone at that QR code, it should take you straight to it. But yeah, hopefully that explained my process a little bit. Oliver, how was that?
That's great. Absolutely loved it. That was a lot of fun, guys. What do you guys think? Let's know in the chat. That was an excellent presentation. We've got tons of questions too, which we will get to in just a minute here. Yeah, and I agree with you, Simon. Like, it really doesn't matter what tool you use, but there is something special about Scrivener for those of us who use it, right? It just really at least allows me to really focus in on the thing I'm working on, but still have this grand view on everything else. Like you said, the forest and the trees. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, let me share my screen real quick, and we will just wrap it up with a couple slides, and then we will go ahead and jump into this Q&A. I see we have tons and tons of questions, so this is going to be a lot. We got a lot of fun stuff coming our way here. Here. So we do have some free resources available. I did drop those links. And it even dropped Simon's book in there. If you guys want to go ahead and Amazon and purchase that, that'd be great. I'm sure you'll love it. Oops, I don't know why Keynote decided to just jump out of there. Let's go back in. Okay, there you go. That's his Substack again right there, Simon K. Jones at .substack.com. And if you're interested also in my free Scrivener Starter Level template, you can access that at ojevanson.com/links. This webinar, along with all the webinars before, are in our webinar library. We'll take the ones from this week. They will be officially in the library starting on Monday. But if you'd like to watch it today, I will get this one also posted on my YouTube channel as well today. So watch out for that. And of course, this entire week, we've been running a promotion to celebrate having Simon with us today. The Scrivener X Simon discount code for 20% off Scrivener until September 1st. So if you haven't purchased Scrivener yet and you'd like to, this is a great time to do it. You can get that discount code right there, Scrivener X Simon, 20% off until September. And I'll drop that in the chat here as soon as I'm done with the presentation here. And this is our last slide. I'm really excited. We're going to jump into our Q&A. You can see we've got probably some odd 14 questions here, 15 questions, and there's probably some in the chat. So we'll run into those. And if you have any Scrivener related questions, after the fact, you'd like to reach out to me or to our support team, these are the email addresses you can do so. If you want to reach me directly, you can reach me at contact@ogevanson.com or directly on Substack as well, for those of you who are on Substack. I also have Scrivener/Mac, Scrivener/Win, Scrivener/Mobile, and Scapple@literatureandlatte.com for all your Scrivener related questions. If you're having any problems, we want to help you out. It doesn't cost you anything. It's free tech support. So reach out to us, let us know. But let's go ahead and dive into those questions. I'll go ahead and stop sharing and we'll get rolling here. So let's see. First off, I have Eric asking, how does plotting for serials differ from novels and short stories? And how do you write a serial if you're more of a pantser? That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
You have any thoughts, Eric?
Yeah.
I mean, not Eric, sorry. Simon, I
I'm
apologize.
sure Eric has loads of thoughts.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think everyone plots in a slightly different way. So for me, I guess one consideration is how much you want to lean into the episodic nature of it. So, when you've got a novel, it's kind of up to the reader, the pace at which they go through that. They can like sit down for an entire afternoon and read the whole book in one go if they want to. With a serial, they have to wait a week between chapters. And that sort of temporal aspect to it is kind of fascinates me, because you're then like, okay, how much are people going to remember week to week? Do I have to include some stuff to help people keep track of what's going on? Do I want to do like a 1960s Batman cliffhanger at the end of every chapter? Probably not. But there is a slight aspect of that. If you in a novel, if you can finish a chapter kind of however you want, because all the reader has to do is turn the page and they carry on. Or they can like go to sleep and then turn the page the next day or whatever. It's very easy online for people to get distracted or forget about your writing. So, any given chapter, you want people to come back for the next one. What that means is going to depend on the kind of stories that you tell. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your characters have to be like literally over like a pit of boiling lava every week or anything. But there has to be a reason to come back. So that's always in the back of your mind, I think. And I think if you took some of my serials and just put them into a novel as is, the pacing would probably feel different to a normal novel. It would feel a bit staccato. So it's the kind of thing where if I turn it into a novel, there's a bit of massaging to do. You maybe combine chapters together, like shift it around a little bit. So I think it's maybe a pacing rather than a story issue. In terms of pantsing, I mean, depends how comfortable you are with just barreling along and figuring out where you're going. If you're like fully committed to that, then off you go and it'll be really exciting. The difference, of course, is that if you're pantsing a novel where you're finishing the whole manuscript first, you can then fix any issues that you stumble into along the way. That is not for me, I don't think. Partly because I like to do foreshadowing, so I like to have things that kind of thread all the way back to the start, and it's much harder to do that if you're pantsing it because you don't know what's coming up. So I usually have those little waypoints on the story so that I can be like, right, I know this character is going to meet this fate I might not get to it for 2 years, but I know it's coming, so I can have stuff that resonates from the very beginning. And sometimes that pays off, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, it's always a bit of an experiment. You throw lots of things in the air and then you catch some of them, you drop other things, but the reader doesn't really notice because they don't know what was thrown in the air in the first place.
So I'm just wondering, Simon, would you consider yourself more of a plotter or a pantser then? Are you, it sounds to me like you're more of a plotter, but I'm curious.
Yeah,
Where
I think probably more towards the plotting
plotter side?
end. But
Yeah.
like I say, if I define my plot too much, I get bored when I come to the writing of it. So I'm probably like right in the middle,
Yeah.
slightly leaning towards plot.
Yep. No, I feel that. I'm kind of the same way. I'm definitely more of a plotter, and I like to know like the key plot points that I'm working towards, but I like the space between to be kind of like, oh, I'm kind of exploring this a little bit. And I would just say if someone who's, going back to Eric's question, like if you're more of a pantser, you might want to just like say, hey, these are the points maybe I want to hit, or just like write it out. Like maybe just write that first draft like a pantser would normally, just get it all out. And
hmm
then you just go back and try to edit that up and polish up those chapter by chapter and serialize it that way, kind of like what you
Yeah.
talked about.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say as well actually is don't obsess too much about plot. Like, I think plot is overrated
Yep.
generally. I think if you decide what themes you want to explore in the book, and it doesn't have to be like a really serious book, like that's not quite what I mean, but if you figure out like what is this book about? What are the things that interest me? What's the reason I'm writing this thing? Like as long as you've got that, they can act as like a compass as you're going through your story. So even if you go off on tangents, you still kind of know where you are and what you're coming back to. And as long as every chapter is in some way exploring those themes, then you're kind of good, even if the plot like wiggles off for a bit and then comes back. And
Mhm.
yeah.
Perfect. Great. So we have Fernando here asking, he'd like to know what's the difference between publishing in Wattpad and publishing in Substack?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I mean, it's fundamentally you're still copy and pasting and then hitting publish. Like the actual like process is very similar. The difference is the amount of control you have. So in Wattpad, any success you have or lack thereof is sort of nothing to do with you. It's a bit like if you stick an image on Instagram or if you put a video on YouTube. Like, yes, there are things you can do to increase your chances of success and to like play to the algorithm or what have you. Um, but it's a bit unknown. And if Wattpad changes the algorithm and the design, then everything goes out the window. And if book one is massively successful, you do another book and you're sort of starting from scratch and you never quite know what's going on. Something like Substack, you're fully in control. So any success you have, you can more directly go like, oh, I know why this happened. If something doesn't work, you also know why it happened, and in both cases, it's probably your fault. But yeah, I find it much more satisfying because it feels like you can make decisions and you're not constantly chasing like what Mark Zuckerberg wants to do. You're just like writing what you want to write, and then you have all sorts of options for how you get it out into the world, based on your budget and your interests and what have you. If you're really into marketing, you can go all in on that. If you've got loads of cash, you can run your own ads if you want. If you hate all of that, you don't have to. You can just write and be quite happy. And the way Substack works is you'll probably find readers anyway. Um, so, I mean, yeah, I would say Substack is primarily a community of writers who are also readers. Wattpad is a community of readers, and you're like frantically waving to try and get their attention. Um, yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. Yeah, I felt the same way about basically every other social media platform out there. I mean, they're all, it seems like you throw something out there and if you're lucky, you can you can get some a response. But I feel like for me, like if you know notes, like if you send like a post called a note on Substack, I usually get some pretty good responses, right? People are actually seeing your posts and they're actually responding, and they're the people who are following you and who have subscribed to you or seeing those posts. Where you could have tons of followers on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or whatever, and sometimes you'll post things out and not a single one of them will see a single thing. So
Mm.
Substack is definitely a great place to be. Okay, we have Courtney here asking, does Substack allow you to create categories of readers similar to Patreon? I don't know if you're that familiar with Patreon or not, but
So you mean like kind of tiers of subscribers, I guess?
yeah, it's hard to say. I don't know, Courtney, can you clarify for us?
So
Let's see
I'm
if we can.
assuming a bit like Kickstarter as well, where you can have different tiers and you pay different amounts. Not necessarily tiers.
Well, I know I've seen on Substack like you can have like different, what's it called? Not publications, but different newsletters, right? Within
Right.
the same
Okay.
one, right?
Okay, yeah, so
Or,
like categories for different stories.
yeah.
So yes,
Yeah.
you can do that. So I do that with mine. So Tales from the Triverse is a they call it a section. So it's his
There
own
we go.
section on the newsletter. And I have a few other ones as well. I've got like video tutorials and I'm doing like a rewatch of a 90s sci-fi thing. And each of these, like some people subscribe to a lot, which is cool. Some people want my like writing tips, but maybe don't want to read my fiction, which is upsetting, but fine. Or the other way around, someone might want to read the story, but maybe they're not a writer, so they don't actually care about the write. But you can, as a subscriber, go in and tick and untick the different bits and bobs to only get the stuff that you want. So yeah, you can definitely do that. There's some interesting segmentation tools within as well. So if you want to just send an email communication to a certain group of certain group of subscribers, you can do that. Um, yeah, there's a lot of things you can do, but you can certainly do that.
Yep, that's so true. You can even have like I just learned this recently. I actually had two different Substack accounts for two different publications. And it turns out I didn't need to do that. You didn't. I had two different profiles. Oh, it was a mess. I ended up contacting support and they got me all squared away. But now I still have two like profile accounts. But anyway, you can have two publications too. It doesn't have to necessarily be sections. You can have two publications under the same account. And so however you want to set that up, I feel like Substack has an answer. And so, if you're lost, you can reach out to their support. They're pretty good about helping out with those kind of things too. So, yeah. Perfect. So Beth is saying, so are you saying you can totally bypass all other social media and just use this? What do you think?
Or just use Substack. Uh, Possible. Well, I don't know.
Possibly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, I
Go
guess
ahead.
looking at my case, I don't use Twitter anymore. Um, I don't use Facebook. I haven't used Facebook for years, actually. I stopped using that at least 5 years ago, I think. It wasn't very useful or interesting. I kept on Twitter for a while because there was interesting people there and they shared lots of interesting links and I found all sorts of cool writing that way. They obviously have nuked external links, so you won't see anyone linking to interesting stuff. So you have to stay on Twitter, but the only people left on Twitter are quite strange, or at least it only shows you the strange people.
Yep.
Um, and yeah, that's the way it all seems to be going. I think Cory Doctorow has written a really good essay called about something he calls enshittification, which is how tech companies in particular start off with something really cool and then slowly over time make it worse and worse. Uh, and Substack is not immune from that, right? It could very easily go that way. But the thing I said in the presentation about how they make money when writers make money, that does fundamentally shift their motivations. Whereas like every decision that all of the other platforms make pretty much, no matter how no matter how nice the people are who work at Meta and Google and whatever, TikTok, no matter how good their individual motivations might be, the truth is that the companies make money from adverts. So at some point that's where the hammer comes down. Like if they're making a decision, do we do this or do we do this? If this one is better for advertisers, they'll do that. And that's why over time they shift away from being useful for both consumers and creators. I'm hoping Substack doesn't do that. So, but yeah, so I don't use any social media anymore. I occasionally pop on Instagram, but hardly anymore because again, they just ruin their own product. Like the efforts these companies go to make their own products worse is really odd. But I still get like good growth on my newsletter. I think going all in on Substack does seem to work. Like there's a debate about whether you're just in like a weird goldfish bowl where Substack writers are just subscribing to each other. And even if you get paid subscribers, is it just writers like shuffling money around and like no one ever gets anywhere? I don't think that's the case. And also Substack is still massively growing. Um, but yeah, I think it is a bit of an escape route from social media. Like if you still enjoy social media, and or if you're seeing good results from it, then cool. If you're not seeing results from it, don't waste your time. And if you hate it and it actively makes your day worse or makes you more stressed and just hate the world, then just yeah, stop. Just go and write stuff and talk to nice writers. That's what I do now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I initially stopped social media altogether myself as well. I was like, I'm done with this. I'm sick of this. I'm just gonna stick on Substack. But admittedly, I have started like Substack makes it really easy to post stuff on social media. I don't know if you've
Mhm.
noticed it, Simon. Like at the end of every post, it gives you has all these lovely graphics from your post. You can actually share it to any social media platform. And I will say this, while I don't particularly love other social media platforms, I don't mind copying a quick image or a link and
Yeah.
throwing it up on my Facebook page or my Twitter profile and just writing a short comment. So long as it, for me personally, it doesn't like feel like I'm like coming up with some grand plan to try to market on social media. I don't mind throwing a link here and there because for me, it's like that's kind of like my minor outreach to those poor souls who haven't discovered Substack yet. I'm extending the hand and saying, "Hey, here, come check me out on Substack," and then we get another Substacker coming our way. And I love that. I love seeing people who don't know it just come and enjoy it. But yeah, don't it's not the end all be all for sure. It's not where I'm spending huge amounts of times like I used to, honestly, like I used to. Okay, let's see here. So David's asking, so I've seen you say 1,200 words is like your target, right? So do you have, he's asking, but what do you have as your like maximum and minimum? Do you have a maximum or minimum, or is that just like, yeah,
Uh, hmm. Not no is the short answer, I suppose. Um, I don't usually go below 1,200 words because I think unless there is some like story or stylistic reason to do that for to make some kind of impact, I don't know. But I think it would be a bit too flimsy. It'd be like a sort of bite-sized thing that would feel weird to readers who are used to like a substantial chapter. Upper limit, like in theory, no, but there is a practical limit, which is just how much I can write in a week. So 1,200 words is not just it's not just because I think it's good for readers, it's also because I know I can write that every week. Like I can consistently, for sure, write that number of words. Sometimes I write more, but I can definitely do that. And like I don't believe in daily word counts. I think they're quite unhealthy. Again, if you can do it, cool. Um, but I think they can disillusion a lot of writers if they're not able to keep that up. I'm all for like minimum word count targets. Like figure out like what's the least words you can write in a week that is still useful, and then just do that. Because chances are you'll be less stressed, you'll get into the flow, and then you'll write more anyway. Whereas if you're like, right, I'm going to write 10,000 words every week, then that's not going to happen. You're just going to get depressed and then
yep.
give up.
I feel you there, Simon. I used to be. I'm very much a numbers guy. I love to see like progress, like you like the progress bar. Like my progress bar is going up. I'm looking at my what do you call it? My manuscript target and seeing that bar go up. And it's getting closer and closer. But at the same time, when you focus, if you focus too much on those targets, especially when something as fluid as art, it's hard to quantify that and say, hey, this scene is going to be this many words because it may change. And so I like how you say this is my minimum, like 1,200 words. That's generally what I hit, and that's generally what I like to hit, and that's great. If I hit that, great. If I go below it, I'm okay with that. It depends on what that actually needed to be, right? And if it goes above, that's fine too. It's really just kind of a way to gauge, like, am I getting where I want to go? Like, am I actually moving in the right direction, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah,
Yeah, I'm very much a believer in like happy, healthy writers, I suppose. Like I don't subscribe to the like suffering artist thing at
yeah.
all. Like I want to enjoy it. I love writing. It's so much fun and exciting, and uh, I don't want to do anything that's going to ruin that for myself because that will reduce the amount of writing I want to do.
Yep. I mean, how many times have you heard that old adage that, writers are poor and penniless and alcoholics and just like
Yeah.
you have to experience the harsh reality of life to tell the heart to write about it. I'm just like, no, you don't have to live this miserable life to
Hmm.
be a good writer. In fact, I think you can, I mean, yeah, sure, you can have hard times. Everyone has hard times. And we experience those hard times, we experience the good times, and all that experience creates a better experience for us to write about, wherever we're at. And so I agree. It definitely should be something fun. I feel like if you're miserable writing, then you might want to reassess, look at and say, okay, how can I change this? How can this be better? Fernando's asking, is Substack or Wattpad better for beginners? What do you think?
Mm, I mean, Wattpad is really easy. You like create an account, create a book, and then post a chapter. So it's extremely easy to use. Substack has like a million options, so you can dive into the settings and there's all sorts of stuff in there, but you don't have to. So you can sign up, create a publication, and then make a post and just keep it super basic. Don't bother fiddling around with stuff. There's loads of things you can expand into over time. Um, but at its most basic, like if you just want to write a post and send it out as a newsletter, it's pretty simple. And then you can get to the more complicated stuff later on. But what I would say is that like you can't build anything on Wattpad. I don't think. Like I was saying, any success you have is going to be a bit fleeting and hard to do anything with. So if you're at the very start of your writing like career, if you want to call it that, I'd say start on Substack or on a newsletter platform. It doesn't have to be Substack. Substack is probably the easiest one to use though, because then you're making a proper start. Like anything you start building there, you can take with you. It will, you know, the audience you start building on a newsletter or on Substack now will be the same audience 30 years from now. Like hopefully it'll be bigger by then, but that will be the start. Whereas if you're writing on Wattpad, 30 years from now, that won't have been much use to you because you can't take it with you. You can't do anything with it. Um, so yeah, that's I think I'd always suggest going Substack. Doesn't mean you can't cross post the story to Wattpad as well if you want. Like try them both. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you there. Wattpad and all other services, like I just you don't own your audience, right? So you can't, the email list, that following isn't yours. And that's not to say, like you said, you can't do that. Why not? Go ahead and go for it. You can use Wattpad and that's fine. But there's just something about being in more, there's just more, like you said, there's more options on Substack. You're in more control of your audience, of who gets what. Like if Substack, heaven forbid, if it goes under, doesn't do well, maybe they start changing things how we don't like it. We can always download that email list and take it to one of those other newsletter platforms and say, hey, I'm going
Mhm.
to start here now instead, and just go ahead and do that. And I think that's a beautiful thing. You just can't do that on Facebook. You can't do it on Instagram. You can't do it on YouTube. You can't do it any of the other guys. You just can't. They don't allow it. That would be great if they did, but they don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a confidence from Substack there. Like they've built in tools and whether they'll stick to it is another thing, but they've committed to you'll always be able to do that. And that again, a bit like the way their financial model's set up, but the fact that you can just take all your stuff and leave, like that's a big like it's a big incentive for them to do good stuff because they haven't trapped anyone basically. Like the other platforms don't need to do good things because no one can leave.
Yep. You're stuck there. Yep. Now I have Amanda asking, do you publish your completed serials eventually? And I know you've published one of them, right? The No Adults Allowed, right? So it's
Yeah.
just the other three you're still working on those, right?
Yeah,
Or yeah.
so No That's Allowed is self-published on
Yep.
Amazon. I did that last year, a couple of years ago. I don't know what year it is. But yeah, I did that as a sort of experiment because I hadn't done it before. Um, Tales from the Triverse, I'm still writing, so I haven't thought about that. The other two, the first two I did, I should definitely do that because I've got these two like amazing resources,
Yeah.
and at the moment they're just sat on Wattpad. Like that, I serialized them over there. I didn't. They haven't even gone out on my newsletter, so they're kind of sitting there waiting for me to do something interesting with them. And I 100% should turn them into actual books. Uh, the problem is time, really, particularly because I'm writing Triverse at the moment. That takes up a lot of my time for doing that kind of creative thing. So the idea of editing and polishing, like the Mechanical Crown, which is another big book, um, I can't. Yeah, I should do it basically. I don't really have an excuse.
It's a lot, right? I mean, you've got this, like you said, it's a 278,000 word book so far that you're working on. So I don't blame you at all. Not working on any of that. I mean, I'm co-authoring a book with my co-writer right now, and between even this is it's not even that long. It's like I think we've been cutting it down. I think we started at the fourth draft was like 135 to 140,000 words, I think. And we've cut it down to 109 right now so far. We've been cutting as we've been
Mhm.
serializing it. And two of us are writing it, and I'm still struggling to do other content and like other, newsletter stuff for, for this, for my, for Scrivener and things like that. I'm like, this is just, it's a lot of work to serialize a book. but it's worth it. It's so much fun to do. And yeah, I mean, yeah. So don't be too hard on yourself, Simon. You're doing great. You're doing good. You'll get to it. You'll get to it.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. One day.
one day. Yeah. Okay, let's see, man. The questions keep rolling in. Every time I close one up, I'm like, I have another. So, how long? I mean, just curious. I mean, how long are you good to go for? We can. I mean, I can keep asking and asking. So, if you,
I'm good. I'm good to keep going for
yeah,
foreseeable.
we'll see. Okay, perfect.
I
We'll
like
just
talking about this stuff, as you may have noticed.
yeah, me too. So this is perfect. You guys are in for a treat. I think this is probably one of the best Q&As I've had. So let's dive right in and see what else we got. So we have Chajart. If I'm saying that right wrong, I'm sorry. We have can readers comment on a chapter, and if so, do you take their comments into consideration when writing the next chapter?
Good question. Yes, you can turn comments on. Substack has comments and likes and thing they call restacking, which is where it's basically retweeting but onto Substack's version of Twitter, which is called Notes. I say version of Twitter, it's like superficially looks and functions like Twitter, but the vibes are very different.
Oh yeah,
But yes, so do get comments. And it's an interesting one. I was writing about that recently actually, because like how much should you pay attention to reader comments? And I think that will depend on the author and depend on the reader and the story in question. So, you know, at what point do you tip into fan service? And
Mhm.
then the story stops being satisfying. Because actually, if readers want something and you give it to them, that's not always the most satisfying thing. It's usually the
Yeah,
thing they don't know they want, which is the cool thing.
yep,
Um, so there's definitely a conversation there. And sometimes a reader might be pondering something, which will give me an idea to do something else. Like that has happened where a reader has maybe been more interested in a particular subplot or character than I expected. Um, which then makes me think, oh, maybe that thing is more interesting than I'd realized, and then I might bring it back in later on down the line. Probably not in the way they expect, but that's it's kind of like a sort of barometer of what's working and what readers are clicking with. So yeah, it can be fascinating, but how much you pay attention to it is totally up to you, I think. Um, and yeah, generally it has to be your story still, because that's why people are there in the first place. Um, yeah.
no, I get that. I get that. Yeah, it's I think it can be tempting to want to just like to as you get comments like that, just please the reader and just keep doing the things they want. But a part of me,
Mm.
I kind of think I'm on that side where I'm like, hey, maybe if they're seeing this so clearly, then that's the easy out. That's the easy thing to do. Maybe I need to think a little harder. And for me, for my serial, I've had some people who've read it, close friends, family, other people, and they've noticed things that I thought I was being not very obtuse about, but they picked up on it quicker than I thought. I'm like, oh, maybe I was a little too heavy-handed with that foreshadowing, or
Yeah.
and so it does make me think a little bit. Hey, do I have to rethink this a little bit different? I like getting that feedback because it forces me to say, okay, that was just too easy to see. That was
Yeah,
too
that's
predictable, right?
that's a really good point. I think if you have like foreshadowing, or if you're writing something that has any element of mystery to it, then reader feedback as you're writing it, as you're publishing it, is really interesting and useful, because like that kind of fine tuning of like how much information do I need to give them so they have something to hold on to, but not that I'm giving away the whole game really early, and like treading that line is quite hard. And if you're writing it in isolation, and you write the whole thing and then you send it off to an editor and a publisher or whatever, like you don't really know if that's worked. Whereas serial publishing is interesting because you can sort of measure that temperature as you go along and adjust as required.
I agree. Yeah. And I feel like as writers too, like we will do that. We will isolate ourselves and we'll spend like years writing a novel. And then we'll come out and we'll get all this feedback and all like, oh, if I had actually talked to someone like within the first few months of, working on this book, I might have corrected this like glaring error that has now bled into the rest of the draft.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think that feedback is so valuable, and getting that feedback consistently early on while you're writing the book. And that's the beauty, I think, of serialization, especially if you're planning to at some point publish this, either traditionally or even self-publish it. Getting that feedback is really,
Mhm.
really critical. Okay, so we have Amanda here. She's asking what genres seem to be popular with Substack readers. Do you have any idea, Simon?
That is a good question. I don't know if the readership is mature enough yet to have figured that out. And by mature, I don't mean like maturity of, I mean like
Age,
as a
right? Yeah.
platform, I
Yeah.
don't know if it's big enough to really discern this. So like Wattpad, it's very YA fan fiction. I mean, it's more than that, but yeah, that's where it started, and it's expanded since then. But it still skews in that general direction, I think. Substack's a bit different. Like Substack's readership in general, like forgetting about fiction for a second, like Substack's readership is people reading politics and news and tech, like stocks and finances. You know, that's Substack's bread and butter. And then 2 or 3 years ago, like some of us fiction people started showing up and hassling them to give us more features. Um, so that's something that I should probably mention actually. Like Wattpad is built for fiction, so readers on Wattpad get a nice table of contents. They can jump between chapters. It's good. It's really good as a reader experience. Substack is a bit more awkward as a reader experience because it's still fundamentally built for kind of one-off newsletters for like journalists and commentators and opinion writers, etc. Um, so for sequential stuff like an ongoing fiction project, you do have to jump through a few hoops to kind of make it more accessible for the reader. Um, so yeah, that is a consideration. But yeah, in terms of like whether it skews in a particular direction genre-wise, I don't know if anyone can really tell that yet. What I
Yeah.
would say is that writing a long-form story is a challenge because it's really long. And if someone comes along, like, you know, I've done, I can't remember what it was, like over 100 chapters. If someone comes along now and sees that there's 100 chapters, like, are they going to see that and think, oh wow, I've basically got a whole book for free that I can read and catch up on? That's really cool. Or they're going to look at that and go, that's a lot of homework. I can't be bothered with that. Um, so my advice probably would be focus on short form, like short stories, 4 or 5 part things, um, or maximum novella size kind of thing. Obviously, I'm not paying attention to this advice at all, but I think that's probably what I'd advise people to do, just because it's easier to get people on board. If someone knows it's a 5 chapter story, so in a month, basically they're going to get that whole thing. They're maybe more likely to subscribe. Whereas, you know, I'm saying to someone, I've been writing this for 3 years and it's not finished yet. Like some people would be excited by that, but a lot of people would be like, that sounds insane. I'm not going to risk committing to this thing when you may never finish it, or you might get hit by a bus, or you know, whatever. Um, so yeah, despite what I do, I'd probably suggest going for shorter fiction at least at first.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, let's see here. Courtney's asking, how do you make sure you adhere to story consistency without having to retcon stuff, especially for long running serials?
Yes, so a lot of that is the upfront planning, which helps avoid like particularly bad plot holes or continuity errors. I think Scrivener helps because, like I was saying in the presentation, being able to hop around and reference things really fast. And if I'm about to include a detail and I'm like, oh, I've written about this already, I can go and check it and make sure that it remains consistent throughout. Um, Planning ahead, so you've got those waypoints so that I know I want to seed in certain things. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And I have a rule that I don't go back and edit stuff that I've already published. So I'll go back and edit like typos or if there's actually an error or something, that's fine, but I won't change plot details. So if I've committed to a plot detail in chapter 10 and then I get to chapter 50 and I discover that's a massive pain in the ass, it's up to me to creatively figure out how to get around that. Because otherwise it's unfair to the reader and then they'll lose confidence in the story. Like if I'm constantly shuffling it, like pulling the rug out underneath their feet. Um, but yeah, it is hard, I suppose. And maybe some of it is designing a story where you can kind of have a bit of flexibility in that regard. Like there might be certain genres that are harder or easier to write in this form than others. Uh, like so, you know, I'm doing crime fiction, but each investigation is about 3 to 5 chapters long, so they're like little episodic cases, like in a TV show. If I was doing a long running murder mystery where it was all this intricate plotting and having to solve this mystery over the entire course of the thing, you can imagine with all the clues and investigations, what have you, that could get really awkward and difficult to keep track of. So yeah, consider that when you're designing your story, I suppose, up front.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so I have Beth here asking, how do you deal with copyright while publishing so fast? Any any thoughts there?
So I presume you mean like protecting my own
I
copyright, I
I think she
guess.
means like, yeah, protecting your work. Like, is there anything you do to protect your writing? Uh,
I mean, short answer is no. Long answer is like, I think in most places, certainly in the UK, like if you do some writing, it is automatically copyright to
Yeah,
you. You don't have to do anything. Like I know sometimes people used to like e uh, email or post their manuscript to themselves, so they had like the date stamp on it and stuff. Like, you don't really need to do that. Like if it's yours, it's copyrighted. And in fact, having an online record that I wrote this stuff at this time
yeah,
is that. So
yeah.
in one way, it's useful. My
Probably.
thinking,
Sorry,
go on.
go ahead.
No, go on.
I was gonna say it's probably even better than if you just have it stored somewhere on your computer. Because think of it, like you have all these timestamps and all this publication showing, hey, I wrote this thing
Yeah.
at this time.
And
You
people that
know,
saw it.
yeah, people read it and saw it. Whereas if it's just sitting on your computer and someone somehow finds it, steals it from your Google Drive or who know, where else, I mean, they can take that and publish it themselves, and then they say, hey, this is my my work,
Yeah,
and you would have a hard time proving that it isn't yours.
exactly.
Yeah,
So in
it is
terms
yours.
of like no traditional publisher is ever going to steal someone else's work. Like it's not going to happen because they immediately lose all trust. So you don't have to worry about like professional editors, agents, etc. Piracy online. So if someone just like copies all my stuff and posts it on Wattpad or posts it somewhere else or whatever, turns it into an ebook and sells it cheap on Amazon, like that might happen, but I don't really care. I think like piracy happens. It happens in all like to movies and computer games and everything. And every time any of those companies try and crack down on piracy, they just end up harming the legit customers who are happy to pay for it. So what I concern myself with is making a really nice experience for the readers who are reading it where they're supposed to be reading it, which is on my newsletter. Um, like readers who are trying to acquire stuff in weird, dodgy ways. I don't really want those readers anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and like they're not going to be taking away from any potential like money I can make or readers I can find because there's plenty lovely readers to go and get. I think that's where I come down on that.
yeah. I agree. I agree. Okay, so Cindy is asking if you use any other like editing or grammar program with Scrivener. Yeah, I'm just curious.
Uh, no is the short answer again. So I obviously do a basic spell check, read through it a few times. I also this year I've started doing an audiobook version. So there's like a you can listen to Triverse as a podcast as well. Which I should mention is you can just do that on Substack. Like you can just record audio, add it to your post on Substack, and feed that RSS feed into like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and it's a podcast. Like you don't have to go and get a separate host or anything. It's really cool. Um, but what I've discovered, sort of accidentally, is that reading my work aloud when I'm recording the audio version is an amazing way to proof it and
Oh
find
yeah.
errors and fix it. So
Yep.
yeah, that's like you don't have to make a podcast, obviously, but reading your stuff aloud is a really good way to spot those errors. If I was making a load more money from this, like I could imagine hiring an editor to help with that kind of thing. Um, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with you there, Simon. I actually I don't know if you guys know like the spoken text tool on Mac OS where you can like just have it like speak text back to you. Scrivener actually has it built in where you can just click the little button in the toolbar and it'll read it back to you. I love that. It means it's AI generated, right? Not AI generated. It's just like computer generated voice, right? I have mine set up as the Siri voice. Actually, ironically, the English Siri voice because I just love the sound of it, and it actually does really, really well. It sounds pretty solid, and I find myself catching a ton of errors just listening to it. And I agree
Mm.
also if you're willing to do the work of speaking it to like actually reading it out loud, that makes a huge difference in catching a lot of those otherwise annoying pesky little errors that would go you gloss over when you're just reading in your head, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've got a background in copywriting, like in the day job as well. So, I've always written stuff. So I think that helps.
Mhm.
Like I write I mean, I say this, you're now all going to go and have a look at the newsletter and just spot loads of typos, but I write an okay first draft. So it's not like tons of work to make it like
Better.
ready
Yeah.
to go out. But yeah, depends on your style of writing, I guess.
And I would say a lot of times too, at least for me, I have used it as a procrastination, like this idea of perfectionism. There has to be perfect before I can even publish it or anything like that. It's the same with my books that I write. It's the same with the email newsletters I used to send out. Every bit of writing, I would like proofread it like 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And I'd still
Mm.
miss things. And I'd send it out and I get people saying, "Oh, you typo here." I was like, "How did I miss that?" I've learned just not to sweat the small stuff. As long as the main core mission got across, that's what matters. And if people point those out to me, great. Thank you for being my editor. I'll go fix that now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think yeah, anyone who's chosen to read a serial online from a writer that they probably hadn't heard of before, like they're up for reading stories in a weird, unusual way.
Yeah.
And the experience of being along for the ride as it's coming together, I think counterbalances any potential lack of polish. So, my serials as I publish them, like they will be less polished than a book from a traditional publisher that you go and buy in a bookshop. Like that's like, I do everything I can to make them really good, but that's just how it is. But readers know that. They know that they're getting a different sort of thing to if they just go and get a hardback book from somewhere.
Gotcha. Good. Good. Well, let's see here. Well, the questions keep growing. I'm going to say we'll probably just do I think we'll end it here in just about 3 minutes. So I'm going to choose two more questions here. We'll answer and then we'll call it a day. I'm sorry, guys. You got so many great questions here. I've loved it. Just sitting here answering them and, with Simon and just talking them over. It's been so much fun, but I think we better get wrapping up here. So, real quick, Simon. So, Ruth Ann's asking, saying thank you. Thank you, Simon. Could you explain your concept of seasons a bit more and how you think about chapters as chapters rather than scenes, I guess, or how do you look at that?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, structurally, it's kind of things that help me and things that help the reader. So yeah, I know in Scrivener you can break it up by scene, can't you? And then that all sits within a chapter, and you can kind of break it up however you want. I do like a document in Scrivener for me is a chapter, and that's an entire piece that will go out as a newsletter. So that when I look at the binder, those are all newsletters basically. That's kind of how I structure that. The season thing helps me to break the story down by kind of the very, very top level kind of arc stuff. It's an ongoing thing, but if like there's a major event at chapter 10, I might be like, right, that's the end of season 1. Like it's a bit arbitrary in a way, like it will just continue from then on, but it's ways to break it up that way. But it helps me just get the shape of it in my head. But I think what I've found is that breaking it up by season, which I do on the Substack, I have like an index post where I've broken it down by season as well. I think it helps make it more digestible. So seeing all the chapters listed in one massive bullet pointed list looks really intimidating to a reader. It's like, oh my God, that's a lot of stuff. Break it down by season and suddenly they're like, oh, well, I'll give season 1 a go because that's only 10 chapters or, that kind of thing. It's the same with a TV show. Like if you went to go and watch, like if you'd never watched The Sopranos or Breaking Bad and you went to go and watch it and it just listed every episode in one list and it was like, here's 500 episodes or whatever it is, you'd be like, oh, I don't really have time for that. Whereas you do have time to watch season 1 and then after that you might watch season 2. So I think it's a bit of a trick, like it doesn't fundamentally change it, but I think humans like compartmentalizing and breaking stuff down a bit. I mean, that's what I do with my writing. That's why I write in a serial form, because writing a novel is a terrifying thing that's basically impossible to do. Whereas writing a 1,200 word chapter is really easy. But if you do that enough times, you then accidentally have a novel.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, and it actually works really well with Scrivener too, because Scrivener's whole point, at least for me, was that I can take this massive problem that is writing a novel or writing a series, and I can break it down into manageable chunks. And it's funny because I remember I had a math teacher in college. He said, like, math is really simple. You just break it down into the smallest form, and then you solve that small form, and then do the next one and the next. I'm like, no, that doesn't make sense to me. Math's not computing. But like ironically, I was able to take that same, I remember what he said. I'm like, well, if that's true for math, even though I'm not terribly good at math, it must also be true for writing and for other aspects of life. And it's true. You just break it down into the smallest form you can do, And you do that and you do it really well and you do it again. And you just keep until the next thing you know, like you said, you end up with this wonderful masterpiece, this beautiful novel at the end when you're done, even a series, right? Okay, well, last question I'm going to ask, and I'm kind of combining a bunch of questions here as I was looking through, just trying to see what's going on. There's a lot of questions about growing your fan base and like on Substack, how do you do it, yada yada yada. But I guess kind of the biggest one that caught my attention is like, how often do you think you should send out posts on Substack, or how often should you send out your newsletter? Is it like a once a week kind of thing, a twice a week, or maybe a once a month? I mean, have you found a sweet spot, Simon?
So I send 2 a week, but like one of them is fiction and one of them is non-fiction. So on Fridays I send a new Triverse chapter, and on Mondays I send a thing about writing. And like we said earlier, like readers can get both or just get one of them if they want. So that's what I do. I think so it's basically weekly for fiction and weekly for non-fiction. I think that's what I've found works. So from my point of view, just from a production point of view, I couldn't do more than that if I wanted to. From a reader perspective, it's also they can just fit that into their week of their their week of entertaining things, like that fits
Yeah.
in quite nicely. Um, if I did it less frequently, then I think it runs the risk of people drifting away or forgetting what it is or being like, what's this? Who's this person?
Yeah.
If you did it more frequently, like if magically I could send it out every day, for example, like I think that would just really irritate people.
Yeah.
Maybe on a short term, like you could do an experimental like 1 week project where you do a new chapter every day, and that's the point of it. But I think if you did that all the time, it would get a bit much. And people are used to weekly from TV shows
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But I mean, I think about what you can realistically do. Like, don't set a schedule that's gonna stress you out.
Yeah. Yeah, keep your mental health in mind, right? Don't be like trying to overdo it. Like big mistake I usually make is to think I'm so far behind. I'm so far behind. I need to catch up, right? I'm always trying to catch up. Like I'm like, who am I catching up to? What am I catching up for? Realistically, you just like Simon said, set a schedule that works for you, and then be consistent with it. And I think that's where most of us kind of fall short is that we just maybe we start something and then we don't continue with it, right? Or, we usually, it's just like when you go into the gym, right? You go to the gym and you're like, I'm going to go to the gym every day and work out for 3 hours a day. And then you, within like 2 days of doing it, you're like, I'm dead. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
You've burnt
But
out.
if you go to the gym with a friend,
Yep.
that massively increases the chances you'll keep going.
Yep.
Like I've started doing park runs here, and I wouldn't go for runs by myself, but if I go for a run with 500 other people around the park, like I go and do it.
That's not bad, right? Yeah.
And serial fiction is the same. Like knowing that even if it's just one person, that there's someone waiting for the next chapter, it gets you back. It's like it's making it impossible to ignore it, basically. And yeah, it's a little kind of brain hack. I think that definitely worked for me.
Mhm. Yep. I agree. Well, thank you so much, Simon, for joining us today. This has been awesome. Like for real. I'm really
Thanks.
impressed with, with you, with our wonderful attendees who came and joined us today. I think we've learned a lot, we've discussed a lot, and I hope everyone is ready for the replay because I know I'm definitely going to be rewatching this and gleaning some more information because a lot of good stuff here today. So thank you so much.
I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for coming. That was really good questions as well.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, we'll definitely, I hope we'll have you again for sure. Like this has been phenomenal. And don't forget, guys, you can follow him on his Substack here. I'm going to drop those links one more time before we jump out of here. Let me see. I got that one there. And let me just find yours real quick, Simon. So we have those. There it is. Having links for some reason is hard for me to find. But we got those posted there. Subscribe, read. Have fun, and I will catch you all next month for our fantasy Scrivener webinar week. And yeah, we'll have a lot of fun. Okay, thank you, Simon.
Sounds great. Have good weekends.
Yeah, see ya. Bye.
Bye bye.